you. I won't necessarily tell you what I think about them. I have some impressions of my own, but these may be just some things to think about. Now, one question is this: can an agreement between the parties affect the 43 Section 43A rules? That is, if parties agree to disregard Section 43A rules, can they do so, and what mechanism, etc. Now, if you look at Section 43A itself, it applies to practices and procedures as may be specified in an agreement between the parties, or as may be specified in any law for the time being in force. So 43A itself gives you kind of an opt-out mechanism from the rules. Now, I tend to take the view that they will apply, that there's no way out of it, that if you want to agree, then you agree to the rules plus standard, where your contractual clauses are super added to the standards that are laid out in the guidelines, but there is room for interpretation. This is not something that's clearly established. We don't have any court rulings on this, so it's not something that we know enough about. Now, another problem is that the reference to an agreement between the parties could give rise to an argument that the provision is only intended to benefit parties who have contracted to have data processing done for them, not consumers who do not have a contractual relationship with the processor. So this is something that, again, do these rules only apply if you are a contracting party? This is something that deeply concerns the EU in most of their evaluations. And they're very interested in the data subject himself or herself directly having access to a remedy. One possible answer is that Section 43 itself says that a person affected, as she pointed out, it's not simply a contracting party who has avenue for redress, but any person affected, which is a pretty wide, it has a very wide ambit. But the rebuttal, the rejoinder to that also is the fact that there must be wrongful loss and wrongful gain. Simply the commission, the responsible handling of data would not by itself give rise to an action, cause of action for a person affected. You have to prove that you have somewhere suffered a wrongful loss, which is kind of difficult in India to prove. So that's the first thing, an agreement between the parties. To what extent does it whittle down or does it add on to data protection principles in India? Second is this question of purpose limitation. I'm going to go through 3 or 4, I'm going to pretend to be an EU data commissioner, and I'm going to, look at Indian law from the lens of EU with a view to not declaring it data adequate, and what kind of, conclusions can I draw from that? Now, purpose limitation, you must have heard endlessly about it, which is basically the idea that when data is collected, it should be used only for the purpose that it's collected. There should not be a creeping effect. It should not be a spillover effect. The purpose should be, and there are various other offshoots to this limitation. That is, the purpose must be specifically designated, it must be communicated, etc., etc. So, from that perspective, what does it, how does Indian law stand? Now, as summarized by Article 29 of the EU directives, it says that the purpose limitation principle requires that data should be processed for a specific purpose and subsequently used or further communicated only insofar as this is not incompatible with the purpose of the transfer. Okay, now as far as Indian law, the reasonable security practices, if you take that as the only law that applies, then that standard is only met by sensitive information. So if an Indian company is, for instance, handling sensitive information about, of EU subjects, data subjects, then that standard is met. But what about other kinds of personal information, just which don't count as sensitive information? Does that get covered? So we don't meet a data adequacy standard by that. It doesn't apply to all forms of information. It's only and a particular concern is something that she also pointed out. Where in the EU, they're very, very sensitive about race and ethnic identity and sexual orientation. In India, we don't have race and ethnic identity is not. Yeah, so race and ethnic identity are not regarded as sensitive personal information, which is probably the only Indianization that we kind of witness in this whole process of borrowing, which is that we jettison things which should be.
That's because our name reveals our race.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I meant. I mean, that's different argument. Second thing is there a mandate to delete and preserve data? And this is where Indian law actually does quite well, which is that the reasonable security guidelines, in fact, at least in token, it makes sounds about the the fact that data needs to be deleted or destroyed. Now, Article 29 and the EU guidelines don't say very much about the mandate to delete and to de-identify information. I think this is one area where we are slightly ahead, we're moving ahead of the EU. What about things like data quality? Data quality basically has to do with the fact that if your data is being stored by someone and that data is wrong, do you have any right to correct it? Do you have any say in what kind of data is housed by who? Now, again, the standard under Article 29 is that data should be accurate and where necessary should be kept up to date. Now, in addition, it should be relevant, it should not be excessive in relation to the purpose for which they are transferred and further processed. Now, in India, we don't. I mean, if you look at the reasonable security guidelines, they don't in fact provide for a correction kind of regime. So if some data controller is holding onto our data, we don't have the right to go and insist that they correct that data, that they that they even inform us about that data, which goes on to the next point about transparency and openness. To what extent are you required to be informed by companies or by organizations that they hold your information? And in India, there's pretty much no generalized obligation on any kind of body corporate except the government to let you know what information they have on you. With the government, that disclosure, that transparency obligation only arises in the context of the RTI. To the extent that under the RTI you can obtain information about what data is held about you, and that is itself kind of a very limited right. You have that right, but in general, body corporates are not required, mandated to disclose what information they are holding about you. And this is again one area where we are sort of not lagging behind. Now, leaving behind is these are kind of just snippets. There are many each one of those principles that she outlined is capable of a very lengthy kind of analysis about whether India's data adequate or not, and there's possibility of arguments each way. I just wanted to flag these three. The last one that I will mention, something that if you go beyond the principles itself, what else are the EU looking for? And one important criterion for them seems to be the delivery of a good level of compliance. What does delivery of good level of compliance mean? It means that we need to have institutions, we need to have processes, enabling efficacious, speedy remedy. So this is reading from one of those documents. It says that the Article 29 requirement is that country must be generally characterized by a high degree of awareness among data controllers of their obligations and among data subjects of their rights and the means of exercising them. Do we in our country, do data controllers in India have a high level of awareness of data protection? Do data subjects in India have an awareness of their rights and the means of exercising them? The EU requires the existence of effective and dissuasive sanctions for violations of data protection principles. Do we have that? Do we have a supervisory body